Have you ever wondered if you had the power to access your intuitive nature within?
No, because I can do it.
Of course you can do it. Maybe not everybody knows that they have access to that potential that exists within.
Yeah. Yeah. And this conversation is going to give you access to your own intuition and then understanding that you actually do have that ability and capability to really tap into that intuitive spirit and that intuitive center that can guide your life in so many different ways that sometimes we don't have access to when we're just operating through our mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we had a conversation with an amazing guest. Her name is Katie Beecher, and she's written a book which is coming out in February, which you can listen to the podcast to learn more about that. And it was such a great conversation because it was like, when you get into the world of medical intuitive readings and things like that, for some people it sounds a little too woo, or they're not quite ready to hear this information, but I think she does an amazing job at demystifying some of the maybe complexity or the unaccessible information that seems to go along with this realm. And obviously where it's near and dear to us because we feel like that's a big part of our own lives and how we help people. But she's got a very unique message, and she's a lovely human.
Yeah, so have a listen and start tapping into that intuition because it really is there to serve you.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Health Ignited with my amazing wife, Dr. Sonia Jensen. How are you?
I'm good. We had a fun day on the ski hill yesterday.
We did.
Watching.
Yeah. We were bystanders watching our boys play. Yeah, which is fun.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, but there's something special about being outdoors and feeling connected to nature and being in that space of just like we drove down the hill and magic was upon us, right?
Yeah, that's right. We had a view of being above or rising above the fog. So that was quite the metaphor for just the times that we're in right now too. Like, how do we rise above from the Maya, the illusion, the fogginess that kind of comes up in our brains and our lives. So yeah, it was good.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that note, we've got a very special guest with us today. And I tell you what, whenever we get to talk about the inner workings of the mind and the heart and the psychology and the intuition and helping people to really wake up to their fullest realization potential through health and emotions and their spiritual body, that's exactly what we're going to be chatting about today with this amazing guest, Katie Beecher. So I'm going to introduce her just a little bit, and then we're going to jump into her story. And so here we go. So she's a licensed professional counselor and a medical and emotional intuitive with over 30 years of experience. So she is featured on Goop. And I got to read this quote because Gwyneth Paltrow is obviously a big fan. So Katie Beecher is eerily accurate. Her readings have a heavy dose of spiritual insight too, which goes straight to what's going on in your emotional life. And that's from Goop Lab. If you haven't seen it on Netflix, you can catch that. So she's also been on Kourtney Kardashian's website, Poosh. I hope I'm saying that right. Miranda Kerr's Core Organics blog, taught at the Omega Institute. She's just got such an eclectic way of working with clients, and she's got an upcoming book. And so if you're watching the recording, you can see that just above her right shoulder. It's called Heal From Within, an Intuitive Guide to Wellness. So Katie, there's a lot more to say about you, but we just want to get into the nitty gritty of who you are and what you're doing to awaken and spread love in this world. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you went from being a counselor to opening up to all this resource that exists within you and every individual.
Sure. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's nice to be here. Yeah, my background is definitely eclectic. I feel really fortunate to have the clinical training of being a licensed counselor, as well as working as an intuitive. And I pretty much work as an intuitive now, but therapy always comes into play. They kind of cross over. So I've always had the ability to communicate with the other side, to pick up people's energies. And, I remember being 3 and just looking up at my parents and saying, the two of you are not equipped to raise me.
Wow.
I'm kind of on my own here. A little bit of a dysfunctional family situation. So most of the energy I picked up when I was young was pretty negative, and it was really scary, and it caused me to turn away from my intuitive abilities and my authentic self. But fortunately, and it's may sound weird to some people that I say fortunately, I developed an eating disorder from starting about age 12. And it was really bad. It was bulimia, and I was suicidal. And I decided that either I was going to end my life or I was going to get better, because I couldn't live that way. And I really feel like it was divine intervention, because I didn't tell my parents. I called our pediatrician and said, this is what I'm doing. And it was 1983, so there wasn't a lot of talk about eating disorders, but he referred me to a therapist with a Jungian background, Carl Jung. And Jung talks a lot about intuition and self-love and those kind of things. So it really fit with my personality. And so that was a good match, because it helped me connect to my intuition and find self-love and learn more about my true self. And it didn't just focus on the behaviors. It was all about learning who I was. And part of that was accepting and understanding my intuitive abilities, psychic abilities, and coming to terms with them and not being afraid of them anymore. So even as a therapist, I've always worked really intuitively, and a bunch of stuff happened. But one of the things was 12 years ago, my mom got a flu shot and became paralyzed for 10 years and then died. And it really taught me a lot just about pharmaceutical companies and toxins and things we put in our bodies, and also the spiritual and emotional link to getting sick, because she had been in a bad marriage for 45 years, which she didn't have the courage to get out of. So it just really taught me a lot, and made me realize that doing therapy wasn't deep enough. So it caused me to explore things like medical intuition that I knew nothing about. And then I discovered I had this pretty cool ability. And, that's really my life purpose at this point.
I love that story. And our paths are quite parallel. I have a similar story of around age 13, having an eating disorder and wanting to take my life. And it was divine intervention. It really just was a moment of this like pure trust and knowing that I'm here for a reason. And that changed my whole relationship to myself and the world. And I was just watching the world from a very different lens after that moment. And same thing with working with women and the things that we're doing, just really finding that interconnection between our spirituality and our emotions and our physical body, and how everything is just so woven together. So I love that you brought all of that up, because that's such a powerful thing for all of us to understand. And do you think that we are born with that intuitive center? And I know I have my perception on that, but I'd love to hear your perception on just, when children are born into the world, do you really feel like we are born with that intuition and that knowing, and that really able to listen to that soul essence? And how does that maybe leave after we are born, or what influences, if that's even there? I'd love for you to speak to that a little bit.
Sure. I would love to. And I'm about the least woo-woo intuitive you will meet. I really do believe we all have this, the intuition and the innate abilities. And even just being a medical intuitive, when you have symptoms, or when your kids, has symptoms, you kind of know right away, do I need to rest, or do I need to take something, or do I need to go to the doctor? Or you're kind of making medical decisions all the time. And so that's using medical intuition. It doesn't have to be this big, huge woo-woo thing. And I know just from my own experience, I work with adults and kids, and I think that kids are more open to receiving messages from the other side, because as we get, or for me, there was nobody I could talk to about any of what I was experiencing. I didn't feel comfortable, and it just wasn't, it wasn't possible until I got into therapy. So I think that kids are unfortunately taught to think like other people and to trust other people, and they're not really listened to, especially if there's a dysfunctional environment, because you can't tell the truth about what you're seeing and feeling. And so you have to push everything about yourself down, including your intuition. So I think we unlearn it because of other people's fears and beliefs and being around people who don't trust their intuition. And I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but so many of the people that I work with, because they have emotional or physical illness, it forces them to change. And it forces them not only into self-care, but also into examining their spirituality in their relationship with themselves. And it's because maybe they didn't have a lot of luck finding help for what they have, or they weren't listened to, or they attacked maybe the physical stuff, but the symptoms are still there, that they really had to go deeper and look at all of the root causes and what was going on emotionally and spiritually. So I really do feel like so many of the struggles that happen to us are really like intuition giving us signals that we have to pay attention and change.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sometimes hearing stories like that, I imagine just just an incredible amount of people that have gone through something somewhat similar. Sonia, mirrored your story as well. And a lot of people don't want to look there, right? And a lot of people don't want to go back and, relive their trauma, and they kind of want to put it, somewhere over there. How important do you feel it is for people to, appreciate, understand, or maybe witness their story again? Maybe they don't have to dig into the most painful parts right away, but what do you think about that? Like, do you think people absolutely do need to go back and do some healing with their early childhood trauma?
So, answering as a therapist and as an intuitive, I think it's really important for people to identify and consider all of the root causes for every experience that we've had. And I don't have to tell you, every trauma, every relationship, every good and difficult experience, impacts who we are. So the most important thing to me is that they recognize everything and see how it could have contributed. And I don't know that it's important necessarily to relive. In some cases, it's important, but a lot of the times it's more important to recognize how those experiences has impacted you. Like, what coping strategies may you have developed, such as being really empathic, or putting a wall up, or having trouble with boundaries, or being a people pleaser, or any number of things. What are those coping strategies that may have served you at the time of the trauma or difficult relationship that you've taken with you and now are contributing to the physical and emotional difficulties?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that answer. I mean, because I think that often that story becomes who we are, and because we compartmentalize it maybe, or we have identified it in a certain way, and then life is just the way it is as a result of that. And I think that, just like, we were talking about this earlier with certain patients that we see and work with that are so deeply ingrained in identifying with their illness that they're not really willing to step outside of what life could be outside of that reality. I'd love to hear you comment on that a little bit more, just in that realm of, especially in the counseling world that you're in. I mean, everything is about the DSM 4 or 5 or whatever number we're on now, and creating a criteria for this is who you are. This is the world we're in, though. Like, we love diagnoses, but labeling. Mm-hmm. Please, if you could speak to that a little bit, that'd be great.
So true. For instance, when I found out that I had Lyme disease, which I probably had my whole life, it wasn't diagnosed in my 40s. Of course, it's scary, but I decided I was not going to label Lyme being there was no my symptoms. There was no my Lyme. There was no I took it seriously, but I wasn't going to identify with it because I'm not Lyme disease. Mm-hmm. And being sick in any way, so for some people, as an example, it gives you an excuse to say no. If you don't have the courage to tell people you don't want to do something, or I can't go to this, or I don't want to spend time with you and your family on a Sunday afternoon, or whatever. So it gives you an excuse to get out of things and to use your voice. And people think that, or also for some people, they don't get attention from the people they care about at all. And I'm not saying that we cause our illnesses to get attention, but for some people, like that's how people started paying attention to them, because they realized, yeah, this person really is sick and they need help. So there's a lot of motivation sometimes for identifying with illness and remaining in a bad state. You don't have to take the risk of pissing people off or disappointing them or changing or whatever. So I think that that's a lot of why I work with people about being authentic and finding self-love, like separate from whatever the hell diagnosis they have. I think there's a lot of investment in not feeling well, and it's really sad, the importance that we've put on that. But yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying, and I see it all the time.
Yeah, I think we're really a culture of being comfortable with suffering. And when somebody is suffering, we can relate to it. And
Right.
That's when we can like empathize, we can have compassion and all these things. So it does give an individual that green light to do what really needs to be done for themselves without, like you said, having the courage to actually say no and then be fearful of being, shunted out of a tribe or not belonging and not feel like they're fitting in and not surviving their moments. So everything's being driven by that subconscious fear that they're probably not even aware of.
Totally.
And yeah. And so I'd love for you to like maybe even identify that for our listeners too, like that subconscious and conscious, because we talk about that all the time, that the body and the brain is doing whatever it needs to help you survive. And we picked up these habits and these awarenesses as we were growing up in order for us to survive, like you were speaking to before, whether it's becoming the empath or the people pleaser, that fight or flight is kind of driving everything. So if you can maybe bring some awareness to that subconscious patterning versus conscious patterning, and if that's something that you speak to with your clients.
Absolutely. And it's a huge part of Jungian psychology too, which I draw from a lot. It saved my life, so it really means a lot to me. And I think it makes sense. He talked a lot about the shadow self, and the shadow is where we put our fears and our shame and things we don't want to show the world. And we think it stays hidden there. That doesn't. We think we can hide who we really are. And it's just not possible, because our real self does come through no matter how hard we try to control it. And control is really about fear. So I think that, well, again, this is Jungian stuff, but the more you try to push things down and keep them hidden, the more powerful they become. And you become so invested in that fear and in keeping your true self hidden that you don't get to be your true self. And it's really true. A lot of times we really don't let ourselves go to the unconscious world. And I think the more trauma you've been through, the less you allow that. But we think that people aren't going to care about us, or aren't going to love us anymore if we have a real voice, or if we are true to ourselves. But the problem is, if we're not, that's how we get sicker. So I think it's very important to work with people that you trust and you can relate to help you discover what's in that shadow, or what you're afraid to show to the world. Or like, I'll give you an example. When I was in therapy, the only person, this is the first time I talked to anybody, opened up to anybody. I was terrified. And my therapist said one day to me, "You're being really narcissistic." And I was like, oh my God, like dagger through my heart. That's the last thing I wanted to be, because I was surrounded by those people. And then she told me this story of Narcissus, who couldn't stop looking at his reflection in the water and died. And she said, "You inherently are not a narcissistic person. However, the nature of eating disorders and the nature of depression are very narcissistic, because all you're thinking about is what you look like, what you're eating. Are people going to see you eating? What are they going to think of you? What's a number on the scale?" And it's all about you. So I had a couple of revelations from that. One was, oh shit, she's right. Okay, cool. And I was like, okay, that got brought out from my shadow into the light now, so I can address it. And it's something I can work on more objectively rather than from a shame point of view. But it was also like, if I can address that and accept that about myself, and still love and accept myself, like maybe I'm not such a horrible person. And what else can I then look at and address that I had been trying to hide?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the key word you said there was observer, right? The more we become the observer of our actions and these habits and these characteristics that we've had to bring into our psyche, the easier it is to just see ourselves rather than get caught up in the emotion of
Yeah.
what that brings up. Yeah. So I love that.
Yeah, I love that you brought in that narcissistic aspect, because I think we can all, own little bits and pieces of that about ourselves. And do you think that there's like, what's the survival mechanism there? Because there must be some role for narcissistic behavior to show up, and it's a stepping stone, no doubt. But I'd love to hear sort of like how that unfolds for people, because I mean, most people, like especially in the world that we're in right now, with there's tremendous amount of fear. Of course, there's a lot of self worry. There's worry about others for sure too, but we really are faced with our own, maybe our limitations, our own mortality. There's narcissism in that. So what's healthy narcissism? I don't know, I'm having a tough time with that word. But is there a healthy level for it? And is there an application for it? And like, when does it become a problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it went back to not feeling like I had a support system and not feeling like people were paying attention, and knowing if I went to therapy, no one was going to come with me. No one cared. In fact, when I finally did tell my parents what I was doing, my father's response was, well, it's not working. You're still fat. Well, thanks, dude, because you were the cause of most of this stuff. So it was like I had to go inward, and I had to take care of me and figure out what I needed. So it was kind of natural that my world became all about me. And so I think there's a difference between like self-love and self-care and narcissism. And to me, narcissism is only, I mean, obviously the DSM-3 version, but it's not caring about others at all and just everything being about you. And when you are in the throes of depression and an eating disorder, that's where you're at. So I think I would love it if people could be more comfortable with self-love and self-care, and even what we teach our kids. I remember being a little girl and saying something like, oh, my dress is pretty or something. And then all these little girls were like, no, you're conceited. Well, so then you learn just to shut up and not say anything good about yourself. And, I think there's just obviously a million things in our culture that need to change, but I think we need to like normalize and celebrate self-love and self-care, and teach people that you can still care about others and take care of you.
I love that reframe. Like that's exactly what I was hoping you were going to speak to, is it's just understanding there's a certain component that, we would tip over the edge where we're really just so overly concerned about ourselves, what other people think of us. And that's not self-love. And you're obviously creating a distinction between the two, which I really appreciate. Yeah. I'd love to get into the book. Tell us, like, what's the reason for the book? Like, what's your core message that you really want people to grasp? If you could sort of share some of that. And obviously we want people to read the book, but what was the driving force?
So when I was 16 recovering, I heard two things from my guides. One was, with connection to intuition, self-love, and self-acceptance, you can heal from anything. And that has stuck with me. And they told me I would be writing a book and sharing this message with millions of people. And, I'm 56. It only took me 40 years to do that. That's okay. So, better late than ever. But all of this time, I've kind of been developing how I work, which is really unique. And I'll explain that because it relates to the book. People contact me through my website. I get a name and an age. And the less information I have, the better. And I tap into my guides and create a 4-page report. It's really, really detailed about every single thing going on in their lives, physical, emotional, spiritual, currently and in the past. And try to think about, root causes, strengths, weaknesses, stuff they want to work on, relationships. And I also create these intuitive soul paintings. And I think I have
Sonny's like, sign me up.
Yeah.
do, right?
This stuff.
So this is just one example,
Oh, wow.
but they're all super different. Like they're animals and plants and whatever. So it's a symbolic way of receiving information as well, and it's kind of fun. So I send the report and the painting to people before we meet, and then during the meeting we talk about all sorts of things. I get more information from my guides and kind of go from there. So my husband calls my book Katie Beecher, the Home Game. And it's, I love my husband's great. It's tells a little bit about my backstory, teach people how to connect to their intuition and self-love, and takes people through how I do a medical intuitive reading, using a lot of the same tools that I use, showing my template that I use during my readings, helping them to identify their issues, their strengths, look at the root causes for what's going on. Really importantly, put the whole picture together. So, you may come to me for, I don't know, acid reflux or something, and showing them that like, there's all these other things that are going on at the same time that are contributing. And so it's not a substitute for an individual reading, but it's really the next best thing to taking yourself through what I do. There's a lot of quizzes and tools and, all sorts of things. And then also hints from my guides about helping to heal.
I love that.
And a lot of Jungian psychology.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so great. And what I'd love to hear some of the tools that you give individuals that they can start incorporating. Like, are there things that people can start doing just in their daily life to kind of tap into their intuition and start really listening?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of ways to connect to intuition, and I cannot take credit for this. I wish I could, but the Jungian definition of intuition is God within. And what he meant was this all-knowing force that is part of everyone. It's a source of unconditional love and acceptance. It's kind of like this perfect bodyguard or parent, and it's always with you, keeping you safe. It helps you make decisions. You're not alone anymore. So it's kind of this, it's more than just like the psychic-y thing. It's something that you have with you all the time. And my favorite technique for connecting, and this is all in the book, is to write out a question or your feelings and direct it to your intuition. For some people, their intuition could mean like someone who has passed that they're close to, or it could mean nature, or it could mean God, or whatever. But direct the information to your intuition, and then see what you hear, feel, see whatever in response to what you wrote, and write that down, and then write back to it, and then see what you get again, write that down, write back to it. So you're having a written conversation with your intuition. And there's a bunch of things that I have found really important about that. Like that technique saved my life. When we try to listen to things in our heads, it's all like, what am I going to have for dinner? And what are my kids doing? And what, so when you write, you have to stop what you're doing. And just that helps it be a mindfulness meditation, and something that, as you're writing, you're using your body. So you have that kinesthetic activity. So it not only helps you focus on what you're reading and getting, but you connect to your body too. And you can also, use that same technique to connect to body parts and talk to symptoms. I talked to my eating disorder when I was recovering. Talk to people who have passed. There's so much you can do with it, but it's so powerful. And it's, I still do it. This is how I talk to my guides. This is, so that's really my favorite way. You can do it for 5 minutes. You can do it for longer. Sometimes I just say, do you have anything to tell me? Sometimes I ask a question. Sometimes I just start writing, because, sometimes you're not really sure what's on your mind, but something's there. And I just, ask for some feedback. But that's a really important one for me that anybody could do. Like, you don't have to have any gifts to just do that.
Yeah, I love that. So how do you, I think you kind of answered this in your answer already, but how does somebody discern between intuition, and especially if you're just kind of going about your day and having these questions and these conversations with yourself, between the intuition and between your mind that's maybe trying to protect you or tell you a story or validate maybe an old belief that you have?
That's an awesome question. So one of the obstacles to listening and connecting, there's a bunch, but one is people overthink the process. And it's like, well, is that just my voice? You know, why aren't I seeing angels? Why aren't fireworks going off? Why does this just sound like my voice? Like, is this real? Is this fear? Is this whatever? And I'll address fear versus intuition first. For me, when you are feeling fear, it makes you more fearful. It brings up more anxiety. But for intuition, even if you're hearing something that's a little scary for you, like it's telling you to do something that you're afraid of, it's settling. You know, you kind of feel like, okay, I can relax a little more. I have some sort of connection. It's okay. What I tell people in terms of the other stuff, like, is it just me? I encourage them to just be open to what they're hearing and what they're feeling. And if it feels good, if it resonates, you know, if it's loving, positive information, who cares where it comes from? You know, just be open to it. And the more you do it, the more you will get used to what that intuitive voice sounds like and feels like. You may feel it in your body too. You know, sometimes I do just feel like it's my own voice, and that's fine. Sometimes I feel like it's coming from, I don't know, somewhere else. But it's all okay. And just to be open to what you're hearing rather than overanalyzing it or being afraid of it, you know, that's a good place to start. Like when I first started, I didn't know who I was. I had no self-love. I had no nothing. So I just was like, I thought of it as God. And like, well, God is my source. It must love me and think I'm okay. Kind of like a dog. You know, doesn't care what I weigh or what I look like. So I'm just going to kind of let this thing send me loving messages. And then eventually I, you know, learned that they were coming from me too. And I, you know, was able to expand that into my own psyche, if you will.
I mean, it's really a practice of self-awareness, right? You know, and I think when people hear this, maybe for the first time, maybe they've done some version of journaling before, or, you know, question asking, and then like really searching for those answers. But it's like, and it's consistency. I mean, you've been doing this for years, and you have this amazing scaffolding of counseling and Jungian therapy to really sort of catch and receive and send messages into, which really helps, I think, to open someone up to, you know, more than maybe that subconscious history, or, you know, their guides or God, whatever it is that person, how they relate and connect to the source, whatever that means to that individual, of course.
Yeah.
So I think that's a powerful practice. I mean, when you're doing that kinesthetic work with the writing, you're probably saying it to yourself inside your head, or maybe out loud. So you're getting all these like interfaces of communication, which I think it's powerful. I mean, when Sonia and I do whether retreats or mastermind courses that we were a part of or what have you, it's, you know, there's this self-reflection process that happens with journaling and writing things down that really gets you to access stuff that you just wouldn't. Like, you know, we live our lives going to work, doing the things. We don't tap into this on a regular basis, you know, and so you're inviting people into this experience, which is just so important.
Even, like, people ask a lot, I want to do this work, or I want to listen to my intuition or whatever, and it's scary, and they doubt that they're intuitive. But I honestly can say that before starting every reading, I get a little nervous, even though I've done thousands of these, because my work is really important to me. I really care about, you know, the people that I'm dealing with. I want to do a good job. I want to get it right. Little perfectionism in there, but, you know, but, you know, it's like, it's important. And so I do get a little nervous, and I never want to become cocky or take that for granted, you know, because I can always learn, I can always do better. And if I'm trying to do it when I'm anxious or when I'm not in a good place, then I'm not going to get, you know, information that's as clear. But sometimes when I'm filling out the report, I feel connected to the person. Sometimes I don't, but I've just learned to listen and allow it, and pretty darn accurate. So.
Yeah, I think in that discerning that you're speaking to too, it's that emotion piece that I have found even within myself. So I had a huge hit of this. I've been kind of tapping into my intuition for a long time as well, like since I was a child. But when we were in Italy just a few years ago and walking through Florence, there was this like real hit, like I call them little hits, and this voice that was very like firm, zero emotion. And I was looking at my older son and it said, "You're going to lose him today." And my mother fear then showed up. It was like, "What are you saying?" "No, we're not. He's fine." And sure enough, within the next 5 minutes, he was gone. And we lost him, and we found him after, but just those however many minutes that went by. And I just was so upset with myself for not listening to that voice that I knew was my intuition and was telling me just, "Hey, maybe hold his hand," or like, "Make sure you're watching him and not getting distracted." And so like how many of us, walk through life with that voice that comes in often to tell us what the path is, but we ignore it because of fear or because of emotions or because of society and the way we're supposed to be. So we don't listen and we just kind of stay on that safe path, but then to find that really the other path was the one that was meant for us.
All the time. I'm with my mom's thing. Her and I actually talked about it, and I realized that it was a chemical reaction, an autoimmune reaction and all, but also becoming paralyzed and removing herself from my father for a lot of reasons. She didn't have the courage to do it herself. And, she had filed for divorce before, never went through with it. Just, a lot of stuff there. He was very manipulative and could be charismatic, very narcissistic, and lots of issues. But we both recognized that reaction was the only way she could get rid of him. And unfortunately, it was too late because she, died and had no life. She was in a hospital bed the rest of her life. But that was a huge part of what happened to her.
Yeah, it's really difficult, I think, for people to really, spend some time and look at that. But yeah, I mean, as you're saying it, and we get to hear a lot of stories from different patients going through things, and you kind of sit back and go, well, you kind of got exactly what you wanted. It just didn't come out the way that you wanted it to, obviously, right? And that's painful for all of us,
Exactly.
Especially when you have, you doing the work that you're doing and seeing your mom go through all this experience, having that history, so how did you sit with that with her? Like, did you reflect on that with her? Like, how was that process? Yeah.
I mean, it was tough because before she got sick, a lot of people tried to talk to her about how unhappy she was in the marriage, and she just couldn't receive it. We really weren't able to have honest conversations where I could be my blunt self. She got mad at me or, retreated or all sorts of things. And after she got sick, I became her sole caretaker for a while, which, throw that in with a dysfunctional family situation and nothing good happens. But, she was able to say, yeah, I really wasn't happy. And I wish I had done things differently. I wish I had chose you kids over your father. I wish that I hadn't been so selfish. I wish all kinds of things, but I tried everything I could to help her recover. But even in that state, she was still attached to my father, and there's a lot of stuff there, but it's just the bond of fear and shame was so great. And I learned that the only reason that she got married was because she became pregnant with me. And it was 1965. And when she hadn't told no one, like absolutely no one. And I was sitting with her at the hospital one day, and I think I asked her like how she met him or something. And she told me this whole story. And I was like, what? Like, you never told me. And she could barely get the words out about getting pregnant, and her parents are what saved me. They're awesome people, but she could barely get the words out. She was still so ashamed. And I think it was that shame that, kind of kept her from having a voice. and allowing her to be her true self. And but it was incredibly powerful, made a lot of things make sense in my life. You know, I wasn't premature like I had been told.
Right. So
You
much
know,
unfolding and unraveling that happens in just that one moment.
yeah, but shame is powerful
Mm-hmm.
and really
Yeah.
keeps a lot of people in a disease state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it really does go back to the old stories and the belief that we've been told of how we're supposed to be. And
Right.
when we're stuck in those stories, that's where shame lives, because now we've identified ourselves with a certain way of being. And
Right.
when we're not being that way, again, we're either going to get kicked out of our tribe and we're not going to survive. So we have to fit in that box and that mold. And when we don't, that's where the shame stories start to show up. And I think the work that you're doing is so powerful because the only thing that brings us out of that shame story is self-love.
Right.
It can't be from the outside world, because it's the
Exactly.
outside world that created that original story that now became internal. So really to unleash that is to bring back that acceptance of self.
I fully believe that. And when your self-love and self-worth comes from inside, it's not as important what other people think about you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yet that's like one of the most difficult things for people to let go of, right? I mean, that attachment to belonging and
I know.
concern what other people think is so heavy on so many people's hearts.
Well, I think it starts at a young age, because children, all they want to do is please who's ever taking care of them. And when they're not receiving that, it's like they're learning how to be then in their world. So if we start, I feel if we start at a young age of really putting that in them, that it's their opinions matter, that they matter, their voice matters, that they're being seen, I think we could have a very different world and different leaders and everything would shift.
Oh, I know.
Imagine if we were all brought up that way.
True. And also just if you can accept yourself and your uniqueness, then it's much easier to accept other people and their uniqueness. And you're not looking at what color they are, what religion they are, or what party they are politically, or we're just all people.
Yeah, that's right. Humans having a human experience.
Right.
Totally.
Yeah.
Katie, I'm so curious. So you get a name, you get a birthday.
No, age.
Age. It's just age and a name. Take it from there. Tell us a little bit about your experience. You get that detail, and what happens next? What happens next?
So if I could tell you how I did it, I'd be really, really, really but yeah, so I start by drawing an oracle card, usually from this deck. Doesn't matter, just to get myself out of my own head, because like I said, I do have that bit of anxiety, and I'm just like, okay, stop, just like, so I draw an oracle card, and I kind of use the message in that card to just get me started a little bit on a direction. And I have this blank template in front of me. I can get it if I don't knock everything down. All right, cool. So I have this. I will not knock down everything. All right, so starts with where it says 7th chakra, and it's physical and emotional characteristics. And then I have this, that's my blank template.
Cool.
That I send to people. So that helps explain to them what the chakras stand for, what body parts, what they mean. And I just ask my guides to give me the information I need. I usually start by seeing some concept of them as a whole. And that's why I start with the 7th chakra, because it is about the whole person. Excuse me. And try to get a feel for, is there an overall reason why they've contacted me, or several? And some people are sick or, have issues going on. Some people just want to know more about their life purpose or connecting to intuition or their relationships. And the fun part about what I do is they get everything. They don't just get one thing. It's like, this is your whole life. So I just open up and start filling in those boxes, which with whatever information relates to that chakra, those body parts, those emotional characteristics. And I have learned just to write things down and not to judge. A quick example is I was doing a reading for a 12-year-old girl, and I heard teeth enamel. My human person was like, oh, she must have a lot of cavities. If I had written that down from my human person, I would have been wrong, because when I talked to her mom's like, yeah, she has extraordinarily strong teeth enamel and she's never had a cavity. So my guides were right. If I try to interfere with that, I screw it up. But I just start writing. Sometimes they show me the inside of a person's body. A lot of the time I get that. I will get visuals of what they might look like, or I'll get words in my head, or oftentimes their loved ones in spirit come through. So I'll pick up like a family history thing, or it often comes through in the fourth chakra, which is the heart chakra. That's when the people from who have passed often come through, which I always think is interesting. But, you know, I'll get something like heart disease, or I'm very careful not to diagnose. That's super important because it's illegal and unethical. There are people who do my sort of work who do that. And that's just not okay for so many reasons. So I will like identify symptoms or say something like this or whatever, and they can verify those symptoms. But, you know, if there's physical stuff going on that we need more help with, I have physicians that I've worked with for a long time that I refer to who can work long distance, you know, and help do diagnosing or confirm what I got or whatever. But it's very much a team process, but we just kind of look at everything and they say, yeah, that's what's going on, or I'm not sure I understand that, or whatever. And then we just explore different ways that they can go about addressing things. And we can get a lot done in an hour. You know, people have said an hour with you is like a year of therapy, which is kind of cool because I already know stuff about them. So they don't have to tell me their whole life story because I'm kind of telling them. And sometimes it's things they've never told anyone. So we could make a lot of headway. And then oftentimes, you know, we'll have future appointments, not always. Some people need it and some don't, but that's kind of my crazy process.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, it's so great because it really does bring people out of their logical mind when you're doing that kind of work and really into that heart space. And that, I think, is where the healing has to happen, right? And that ripples or trickles into all other parts of ourselves, the physical, the emotional, the everything, when you're speaking from that heart space and opening that door.
People say they feel very seen and heard. You know, just when they first get the report, I hear that a lot. I feel like you already know me.
Yeah.
And I think that's very disarming in a great way.
Yeah.
Well, there's so much value in knowing, you know, these sort of broader stroke, but also intricate details about our personality, you know, and maybe a life purpose that we are having difficulty accessing. Like, you know, I think back of the many times where I got a chance to work with an intuitive or someone who's able to really understand more of the emotional, spiritual journey. It's really helpful information. You know, it really, like, to your point of like the physical symptoms or some of these other things that are going on, it helps to put things in perspectives when you can see where your strengths are and really apply yourself in those areas. So, I mean, huge amount of value that, again, you're not going to get through, you know, going to your typical run-of-the-mill doctor, right? Right. And there's a role for that too, but, you know, seeing these bigger pictures and these intricate details about our psychology and emotional body and spirit, very, very important for sure.
Some people don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
They come to you for, I just want to know what supplements to take. Just tell me what I need to do. Like, what vitamins am I deficient? And I'm like, well, yeah, but you know how your marriage sucks?
Yeah.
Right. Got to work on that too. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. So our final question for you, if you knew that today or tomorrow was your last day here on Earth, what is the message that you would like to leave, or what imprint do you want to leave on the earth?
Wow. That we're really here to love ourselves and love others. And that's the basis for all kinds of health. You know, just don't be afraid to be yourself.
I love that.
Love it.
Thank you.
I love that. And your tie-dye shirt matches your book perfectly.
Right?
Yes.
I know.
I was totally looking at that.
Our kids are so into tie-dye right now.
They are, and I love that because we were when we were young. So
Absolutely.
So fun, isn't it? Do you get
So
to like
fun.
tie-dye shirts with them and stuff?
we have a little kit. I'm waiting for
Excellent.
Yeah, so we can do that outside.
Art with kids is great.
That's right. Yeah.
Katie, thank you so much. Is there any last little bits of word? Oh, we want to find out where we can access the book. February 15th. Yeah. Tell us about that stuff.
So everything kind of goes through my website. It's katiebeecher.com. BEE, not BEA, BEECHR. There's a link to my book. You can book readings through there. You can read all kinds of like interviews and press articles and read the Goop stuff, and kind of everything goes from there. I'm on Instagram, and I like talking to people on there too, and Facebook and all that. So yeah, that's kind of the central hub.
Perfect. We'll put that in the show notes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Katie.
Oh, thank you. This was great.
So much fun chatting. Yeah.
It's so nice meeting both of you.
Yeah, you too.